First, I want to say thanks to all of you for being here on a very kind of dreary day with fog. You're definitely the hardy lot to be here. Thanks so much for being here. My name is Terry Ryan, and I am Vice President for Ohio Programs and Policy at the Thomas B. Fordham Institute. And we're the ones who help sort of organize this event and the survey. And what I thought I'd do right now is just real quick offer up a few thanks. First, I want to thank Kirk, Hamilton, and Bassa for the support on this survey. Quite frankly, without their support and encouragement, there's no way this could have happened. And it's fun because I know some of his members are probably saying, why are you helping those guys at Fordham? And I'm sure there are some reformers who are saying, why are you engaging Bassa to tell us how superintendents feel? But I think that's exactly the reason for why we should do this sort of thing. I also want to thank the superintendents, some of whom I gather who are here, for actually participating in the survey. It was a phenomenal number, 56% of the state superintendents, 344 superintendents. That was a number way beyond anything we thought that we could get, and we appreciate that. Third, I want to thank the Nord Family Foundation for helping to fund this project. John Mulaney, I don't think's here, but I want to thank him anyway. And then finally, I would like to say thanks to my staff for all the good work they've done in putting together the report and in helping with putting together this event. And what I'll do right now is just take you through what the agenda is going to be. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Steve Farkas, the lead researcher, is going to come up here, and he's going to take about 30 minutes to take us through the key findings in the survey. And then we'll quickly move to a panel discussion, and the panelists will include Superintendent Steve Dakin from Reynoldsburg, Kirk Hamilton from Bassa, and then Senator Peggy Lehner. I will moderate that conversation and encourage participation from the audience. And then finally, we're going to have Dr. Richard Ross, the state superintendent, is going to give us some concluding thoughts on where he thinks this might take us or what he thinks it might mean for us. And so with that, I'd like to have Steve Farkas come up and take us through the key findings of the survey. Thank you, buddy.
Good morning. That, if you go back for just a second, that's not me. That intense-looking young, that's me in a former life, a very young and we can go. This works? Jeff? Oh, yeah, very good. So just a quick word about the FDR group. It actually stands for the Farkas Duffett Research Group. And my partner is Ann Duffett. She actually makes the show run as well as it does. And we've been doing work on education since 1993. In a previous life, I was Director of Research at Public Agenda for the past 8 years. I spent a lot of time doing the same kind of work, but on our own. And a surprising amount of time in Ohio. I should get a second home in Ohio. I keep saying that because I've done work here at, and actually I come to Ohio to moderate focus groups on national public opinion research projects because Ohio is still an excellent indicator. You get a good feel for how Americans think by talking with Ohioans, and not to mention they're nice people. So in 2011, we did a study of Ohio superintendents. It was called Yearning to Break Free. It was all about managerial freedom and autonomy, which they wanted. That was the kind of main theme of that study. And with this study, Jeff, you're good. This study we did, we took mostly a different take. Ohio's education reform agenda has been full. And we thought, and Terry thought, that it would be a good time to take stock of where we're at, from the superintendent's perspective, in terms of implementation. A lot of the questions had to do with how well things are going on the ground, what obstacles they're facing, what's tricky and what's working well. So we got an unusually high response rate, and that again is because of Bassa's involvement. The email invitation went out under from their email, so it kind of penetrated the technological barriers, and we got a 56% response rate, pretty good, very good for in my business, which is getting more and more tricky. And all the data was collected online. We did do some follow-up phone calls to encourage non-respondents to participate. You know, some people did. Some people said, I'm too busy. Thank you very much. And I'll just say one thing I do, which I don't know how many in my business do, is I like to interview the people I survey beforehand. So we used 2 focus groups and some one-on-one interviews with superintendents and with others to get a feel for how they talk about the issues. Some surprising issues that we didn't think were going to be important were included in the survey to get a feel for the words they use and the issues and themes that they care about. So we rolled that into the survey as well. It's not just an agenda that we come in of our own. It has to reflect, to some extent, the superintendent's concerns and agendas. So that's about the survey methodology. Let me stop right here for a second and say that if you have a question that's specific to a chart or a question, please, let's handle it right there and then. Otherwise, if you hold the questions and I can deal with them at the end of the presentation, that would work well. You could tell them I live and work in New York City. I talk too fast. Okay. This is a funny slide to put up first, because actually, it's a repeat of a question we asked in the 2011 survey, and let me tell you why I put it up. It's my favorite finding of the study. And it shows a modest improvement from superintendent's perspective of the teachers that they see come through who have gone through the teacher licensure process. It's not overwhelming, the improvement in their perceptions, right? You can see that it went from 5% to 11% saying that the new teachers they see are well prepared to succeed in the classroom, an improvement from 55% to 63% in the percent saying they start off with at least a baseline level of acceptable quality. And then you see the final bar over there, a reduction from a fall from 39% to 25% saying it's nothing more than procedural compliance. So there's been some change. It's significant, it's not overwhelming, but what I like about it is precisely that reforms can make a difference if you stick with them and if they make sense. You did make changes, right? There was a teacher mentoring and residency requirements have been upped a little bit, and the tenure numbers have years serving before you get tenure have been increased, and it's had a difference, and I like it. It shows that something good can happen. It's nice to start off with some good news. Let's go on to the...
Steve's the half full guy.
I'm the half... I'm not the intense guy looking at... So we'll start off with we had a litany of basically nine reforms that we looked at in the survey, and I said a lot of the focus is going to be on implementation, but the overall view is that there's a lot of optimism among the superintendents for the Common Core state standards. We have 68% believing that the Common Core will lead to a fundamental improvement in Ohio's K-12 education system. That's a nice number. So it's the number one reform that they're optimistic about. 81% predict that 5 years down the line, the reform will be with us. So there's an expectation that this is something for the long term, at least as far as we can tell. And there's been some progress. They report that 64% report that virtually all of their teachers have undergone professional development, or more than 3/4. That's a lot. So they're teachers already, and it's the most promising of reforms. And if you turn to the next phase, we see in terms of other elements of implementation, we see it's a work in progress. So only 26% say that their English language arts curriculum is now completely aligned to this CCSS. A similar number, 23% saying the math curriculum is aligned. And the biggest challenge appears to me to be the absence of the assessments. A lot of superintendents are waiting for the PARCC assessments to come in so that they can finish the job. 87% say the absence of those assessments makes preparation for the standards difficult. And another 77% say that they're worried about the lack of computers and technical capacity to implement, because apparently there's a lot of web-based or computer-based testing that's required as part of this. I did a little bit of a typology to see, okay, what's the overall picture? And you can see that few are leading the charge on CCSS, meaning 12% have their English curriculum aligned, their math curriculum aligned, and their teachers are professionally developed to take the ball and run with it when it happens. That's 12%. Another 33% have parts of those in place, and 54% we define as stragglers. There's still only one part of that is happening. So that kind of gives you an overview of where we're at in terms of implementation, where the superintendents tell us they're at in terms of implementation. Another reform that obviously has hit your state and you want to talk about is the implementation of the value-added assessments and teacher evaluation. The current status is this. Only 17% have policies and procedures in place to make this happen. Right? So 77% are still working at it. They're reviewing policies, they're looking at options, they're not there yet. There's some degree of optimism about this change. 42% say it will lead to a fundamental improvement in K-12 education. You don't see that up there, I'm just giving it to you. But there are problems in implementation. Again, let's look at what those are. There are a lot of concerns. I think first and foremost, what I heard in the focus group and it reflected in the survey is they said, I don't have the tests for some of these subjects. How am I going to do a value-added analysis of a teacher who teaches art or gym? Now I had why can't you do gym? If he does 10 push-ups at the beginning of the semester, he does 12 push-ups, he's improved. There was a comeback that made sense. I don't remember it now. I just remember my puzzlement as a thing. But they make the point that some subjects are not ready in terms of the tests. And that's at 85% saying that it's hard to measure student growth in some subjects. And they're saying we're going to evaluate teachers and then we're going to make hiring decisions, firing decisions, dismissals, salary decisions based on these tests. Guess what? Here come the lawyers. So 93% predict that this will be one of the kind of consequences of implementing this policy, is we're going to be spending a lot of time in court. And they've got enough legal business to deal with from what I hear. There's from special ed to busing routes to everything that you can imagine. There's litigation that superintendents have to worry about. I think the other part that they worry about, superintendents worry about, is the evaluation requirement on the part of principals, and they're afraid that principals will burn out. There's be too much of a pressure on their principals to evaluate, and they won't have time to do other things that are important. On the other hand, 73% say that student growth measures to evaluate teachers are going to become more and more part of the education scene. So there's an expectation that the idea of it is here to stay. On the other hand, there's a lot of other hands here, 39%, say that predict that Ohio will either postpone or revise its value-added assessments. So some of our, these superintendents most of them are wise and experienced in the ways of the state. They've seen reforms come and go, and they have a feel. So ask those questions, their expectations gives you a nice feel. If you're a legislator or an elected official, you want to know, what is the frontline leadership thinking, expecting, and that's part of it. One of the questions I had was whether they thought it was the politics or the tests that get in the way of implementing value-added assessments. And you can see in this chart, it's not political resistance from teachers and unions that they worry about as much, they worry about it some, as they worry about the inadequate tests and the implementation issues. In other words, the technology, the tests are not in their assessment, in their evaluation, not there yet to make it happen. That's the question you have to deal with as a state. Okay. Obviously, another reform we had to talk about, if only because, go ahead, I'm sorry, there's a question up there.
In this regard, Steve, you know that 85% of the superintendents feel it is too difficult to come up with measurements, value-added measurements. Have they come up, were you able to draw out any alternatives or any options that they see that would accomplish the same?
Yeah. Yeah, I should say, I should always start off with, I'm not an education expert. I've been in the field for 25 years doing the work. But from that, from a couple of those interviews, they were talking about working with in some places, working with their teachers to hunt across the country for the right tools. So there is a kind of engagement within the districts to try to corral this issue. And I don't know how many districts, but it's not something that they're just not paying attention to. They're trying to work through it. You know, I don't know if there's a I don't know if there's a statewide effort, actually, to do it. I know that Terry tells me that the math and English language arts curriculums, there are tests for that are reliable. 4 to 8 in English and math. Okay. So we talked to them about the third grade reading guarantee, and I have to tell you, there was in the focus groups immediately you felt a bit of resentment among the superintendents over this legislation, over this reform. And only 20% believe that the third grade reading guarantee will lead to fundamental improvement in education, in Ohio's education system. And the biggest complaint that they said in the focus group and in the survey was, we were doing this as much as we could already. 81% say our effort has been full on, and this is just actually political grandstanding on the part of elected officials, and we're the scapegoats. Yeah, they're making it happen. On the other hand, when you look at this pie chart, 46% do say it has caused implementation of new interventions or policies. So you have resentment, and then a little inkling here on this chart that something is afoot in these districts. And if you go to the next chart, we'll see that actually, by their own reporting, there was some discretionary effort, extra discretionary effort to be had among most districts. I'm not going to tell you it's overwhelming, but if you look at it, the most key things to my mind that there was early intervention for reading strugglers. 15% say that the law has pushed them to do a lot more, right, on this front, and 31% say a little more. So we add that up and we get 46% saying we're trying harder, if only a little bit, on this front. In terms of retaining students in earlier grades, 30% predict or say that it's going to push their district to do a lot more, and another 35% say a little more on this front. In terms of warning parents and giving them a heads up that their kids are struggling, 17% say they're doing a lot more, 43% say a little more in terms of systematic kind of warning that their kids are struggling. So you do see some consequence on the field, and I think that's important for everyone to think about. You know, both the superintendents in the sense of was there some discretionary effort, and from the point of view of legislators, the point of teacher licensure did become important in the focus group, and again, in the survey. And a lot of people said, I've got great teachers, they're not licensed for reading, the law says I need, so I'm going to file waivers. That's the first thing I'm going to do next year so that I can keep them, and then we'll try to catch up to the law. So there's a little bit of compliance resentment on that front. By the way, only 16% believe that the law will be in force 5 years from now. So in terms of prediction, these frontline district superintendents are thinking there's going to be some backtracking, right? Backtracking. You know, there was a little bit more resentment on the upcoming change to the grading system of districts and schools. They're going to the is it A to F now that you guys are going to be doing, from excellent with distinction. And you see that actually we asked the same question because thankfully we did not refer to the specific details, only to the general concept. And you see a decline in the percent saying it's mostly a good process. And I think it's, you know, so the decline is from 57% saying it's a good idea to 49%. And I looked at the numbers, and 64% in my survey said that their districts were excellent or excellent with distinction. So I'm thinking, if I'm scoring high, where am I going to go with the new scoring? I can only go. There's only danger of going down. So, if I was a superintendent, I might not enjoy that, the prospect to my local community of getting a lower grade. So I think some are just worried that a downgrade is in the offing, and that this again was taken for the sake of political impact. We asked about open enrollment. Jeff, you're like a mind reader. Just, yeah, you're perfect. You're on. You're listening. We asked about open enrollment, and people like the idea. They think it's a great policy. I would call attention to the suburban superintendents. They're less enamored of open enrollment as a policy, as you can see by the numbers. And my thinking was they probably don't need the extra money. They don't want to deal with the kind of political fallout, and then within their communities, people move into their towns to get a great education, and now somebody's going to freeload off of their great education, or some people that we don't like come to our neighborhood. So there's a little bit of probably some political resistance, based on that. But the open enrollment policy in general is a favored one, and apparently most districts are using it to some extent. Okay. We asked about blended learning, the kind of use of technology, online learning, and classroom instruction, since that's the kind of hot issue of the day these days. And it was actually the second most popular reform that of the laundry list of 9. It came out number 2 after Common Core. What was interesting to me was that only 5% actually use it in an overwhelming sense in their district. So either it's a kind of theoretical or maybe it's an emerging issue. It's something that will get stronger and stronger as time goes on. But people are still talking about it a lot more than doing it. And that's, I think, interesting to note. And you have credit flicks on the books for a long time in terms of your law. And again, this was another, now this one has been around for quite a while. People love it. Well, at least they like it very much. It's number 3 reform, but not widely used. 52% say few or none of their students use it. And when I looked at the number of the superintendents who do use it, who report that their district students do use it, it's mixed. Some of them are doing it to catch up on classes that they never had, and I think it was intended for more grandiose purposes. It's not used very much, and it kind of seems like nobody's talking about it or using it all that much. I know that some people are, and from my interviews I learned that. But in the survey, it's not widespread. All right, we're still going good. All right. So now I've been talking about this list of 9, and Terry loves this chart because it shows that the charter schools, as a promising reform, is at 2% of superintendents. So this is, I got to give you guys credit. First of all, it's a frank conversation that we've been having about the charter schools, and to the extent that superintendents are not really enamored of them. And also the BASA and its willingness to talk and open their membership to a survey that a lot of the questions are hard or about issues that they're not really happy about and don't agree with. And I thought that was that's a good thing about that you're having this kind of conversation based on data rather than kind of the blaming game. But in any case, that's where charter schools and vouchers end up at the bottom. I think the story is a little bit more complicated with charter schools. 53%, there's another question in the survey, that says, have you converted any of your schools to charter schools, the traditional public schools to charter? So you can do that in the law, right? Only 3% have actually done that across the state. 53% believe that charter schools have damaged the traditional public school system, but 37% say it's had a mixed effect. 11% say it's had no effect. So I think in a lot of the comments in the focus groups and in the online commentaries were about the online charter schools. That's generated a little bit of negativity also in the bus. Superintendents represent the traditional school districts, and that's their bread and butter, and that's their system. And they don't see charter schools as a saving grace for them. And I think we're going to probably talk about this. I don't know that education reformers who support charter schools want them to think of charter schools as the enemy. And I would think they would love it if superintendents took more and more advantage of the charter school strategy and converted and done different things with them. But you've got to convince, you've got a lot of convincing to do on this front. There's a lot of work to be done. Okay. I asked some tough questions that, that made people angry with me. It's like forced choice questions. People hate forced choice questions. How am I doing on time? Am I okay? All right. And one of them was, are Ohio's education problems limited to the urban, large school districts, or do even suburban affluent districts, can they be doing better? And actually, 44% did say that everyone could be doing better. Even the suburban affluent districts could be doing better, which kind of implies openness to we can get more out of our system, that we're not resting on our laurels. We should not rest on our laurels. So this is divided views here to some extent, 52 to 44%. So we have a breakout of the urban, suburban, small town, and you can see that it's the small towns that think that the urban core is where most of the problems are. But the suburbs, 42% of suburban superintendents saying that they could be doing better. That's nice. I think that's helpful. I think there were some people some superintendents who were willing to reflect on their own profession and say, we need to be doing better. 30% say public education is stuck in old ways, we should be trying to do things differently. 69%, 7 in 10, right, say, we're doing a good job of keeping a pace. I had another question that's not up here, which was about reflecting on their colleagues. And I think I'm not remembering the number. It was less than 50%. It was less than 50%, but it was a substantial number, who said that too many of my colleagues are stuck in old ways of doing things. They're not trying. So there is some kind of notion out there that on the part of some superintendents that we should be doing more. Okay. And then I derived through my Columbia University group, the only thing that helped me probably, this graduate program, was this advanced statistical technique. So we derived this group we call the contrarians. It's 9% of the superintendents who actually are going against the grain. And on 5 key questions, two of which are attitudinal and 3 of which are policy oriented, they go against the grain. Vouchers, charter schools. It's a small number, but you can count on them showing up probably in this group. There's a similar number. It's 9% of the population. In actual numbers, it ended up being how many? 30 people. Okay. Yes. And I guess I should start winding down, and let me give you my last. Come back to this too often. Ohio's legislators are making policies to score political points. This, I have to give voice to this sentiment out there. But I think it actually calls for, it's easy to say dialogue. But to me, dialogue is more than communications. It means taking into account the other person's point of view and starting point. So if leadership in Columbus or in other places in Ohio has a sense of what the feeling is out there, you start off with that assumption. And superintendents ought to, and they said this to me in the focus group, sometimes we're wrong. Sometimes we don't do enough, and we need to be pushed, and it opens the door and that's why legislators do this, because we're not doing sometimes our job the way we ought to be doing. And I think if both sides kind of approach it with this in their mind, and I would say to superintendents, if you go back to the 3rd grade reading guarantee, it does show that sometimes there is discretionary effort to be had out there, and Columbus is picking up on something, maybe not everything, maybe in the wrong way, and they're going after it for that reason. So there has to be, and maybe they're not doing it the right way from the point of view of superintendents. And maybe that's where the dialogue comes in of how to do it the right way. And then I'll go back to my favorite reform, which was that teacher licensure. It's quiet. It wasn't very controversial, it doesn't seem to me. And it's had a very nice little significant effect in just a couple of years in terms of superintendents' perceptions of the quality of their teachers, which most people agree is the #1 kind of leverage point for education. So, and then I think there's a kind of call to reformers, like the Fordham Institute, because the numbers are not good in terms of the charter schools. And why is it that superintendents feel that way, and what can be done, if anything, to make it part of the arsenal of a superintendent, or at least something that they see as not an enemy, but a potential ally. Well, that's about it for me, and I'd love to take questions on any part, methodology, or complaints about the survey questions. Usually somebody complains about a survey question when they don't like the results. But that's valid. People are going to go to the center? There's no... Oh, nobody has a question? All right, very good, I'm done.
You did such a fine job.
Or Ohioans are too polite, the Buckeye folks.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. I have to say that I've had trouble sleeping since I saw this survey, because we will readily admit that the Fordham Institute has advocated almost every single one of these reforms at one point or another. And I think we're going to continue to advocate most of them as well. But it has been humbling, and there's obviously an issue here in terms of how these reforms have been communicated, how they've been implemented, and other issues. And with that sort of in mind, what we'll ask is to bring our panelists up, and we'll start with Kirk Hamilton from the Buckeye Association of School Administrators. And I'll just introduce Kirk. I mean, he runs the Buckeye Association of School Administrators. He's a longtime educator. I've gotten to know Kirk pretty well over the years, and I have a lot of respect for him and have had a number of feisty engagements with him over the years as well. And I'll repeat that there's no way we could have done this survey without Kirk's help, and so thanks again for that. Secondly, I'm going to invite Steve Dakin up, who is superintendent of the Reynoldsburg City Schools. He must be a contrarian, because I think he has 5 charter schools in his portfolio in Reynoldsburg that he authorizes. So we're going to have him in the middle. We're going to have Kirk as the superintendent. I think, am I right on that?
No, Peggy's.
Oh, well, Peggy in the middle. Peggy just went, there's Peggy. And Peggy Lehner is state senator from Kettering, and she is chair of the education committee. She's actually my state senator, so it's a pleasure to have Peggy join us. And thank you for being here. And I also want to acknowledge that Dr. Dick Ross is in the house. Thank you, sir. And I have to say, you guys are, this is, some of what we're going to talk about is tough to talk about because there is some controversy around some of these things, and I do appreciate you being here. So I think what I'd like to do, if I can articulate this question well, is it's important to get a sense of sort of on a scale of if you think education is doing as well as it can possibly do by all kids in Ohio is one end of the scale. I think on the other end of the scale is, you know, do we simply have too many schools and districts that are failing to educate kids to the level that they need to get to? And I think where you fall on that scale has an impact on how you view reforms, the urgency of reform, how many reforms you need. And so with that as a concept, if it makes sense to you, I'd like to ask all 3 of the panelists, and I've asked Steve to stay up here, just if we have questions that he can help us illuminate, or he may have a question he wants to jump in. And I will also quickly try to move to audience participation, because I do think it's really important that you guys are involved in this conversation. But with that, Kirk, give us a sense. I mean, are schools in Ohio, for the most part, delivering based on all the constraints they face, based on limited budgets and all the rest, or are there significantly more that they could be doing? Where are we on that spectrum, in your view?
Well, Terry, I think that I'd have to say that the majority of school districts in Ohio are doing, I think, a credible job, all they can do with the resources they have. That said, I'd also say that there's always room for improvement. There's always room to focus on different things. I don't think there are superintendents and boards of education and teachers and principals out there that aren't going into school every day trying to do the best they can for the boys and girls that they serve. That said, I think there's sometimes a focus that could change. But when you look at where we are in public education today, we have the highest achievement levels we've ever had in the history of our state. when the bar is raised, given time, school districts have responded and accomplished the things that have been required of them. But overall, I would say that school districts are out there doing all that they can every day. Could they be more focused? Should they be focused in different directions? Yes. The other thing that's hard to respond with that question is Ohio is a very diverse state. And what rural southeastern Ohio looks like is vastly different than rural northwestern Ohio. The urban environment is different than the suburban environment. So we want to paint with a broad brushstroke public education, but there are so many differences and intricacies from district to district that sometimes that's difficult to respond to.
Do you want to jump on that question, Steve or Peggy, or do you want to? I mean, there's this notion of customizing public policy to actual needs of particular districts and whatnot is an interesting one, but I don't know if we want to go there yet.
Yeah.
So please, Steve.
Well, I'll just echo what Kurt says. I think that from my perspective, and I don't know if I'm one of those contrarians or not. I think I've been called worst in my career, but I do think that with respect to where we are, we're performing better now on objective measures than we ever have before. I think the challenges and where I see, I never see this from a deficit model. I see this from it's not a question that we're not doing a good enough job. The question is the bar has changed. The goals are different. The world has changed. The requirements that we need for all young people, not just some young people, have significantly changed. And so from that perspective, that's what's always driven kind of our quest to innovate, and because we innovate for results. We just don't innovate for the sake of innovation. And so I think with that respect, it's not a deficit model for us. It's not a blame game. It's about we need to raise the bar higher so all our kids achieve at high levels.
And let me just pretty much echo what Steve just said. I mean, it seems to me that what has happened is I visit schools all across the state, and there's some fabulous schools in this state and a lot of people doing very, very good work. But the reality is that a lot of things have changed. The demographics of our student bodies have changed. We're dealing with a lot more poverty, a lot more single homes, a lot more challenging children are coming into the schools, and perhaps there needs to be greater attention paid to how we educate that group of kids. That's just different. And then what we need to know has changed. You know, the days of walking out of 10th grade and into the factory are gone. We know that you need some post-secondary skills. And then technology is a challenge. So I think that the reforms that we put in place should be center around the new reality of what the challenge is in education.
Yeah.
I think there's danger in the conversation also when we don't recognize that the diversity in communities and the values and the aspirations that are different in various communities. It is, I started my career in Claremont County in a small district. I finished my public education career at Southwestern City Schools here in Franklin County. I can tell you that the aspirations in Claremont County are different than they are in Southwestern City Schools, different than they are in Upper Arlington or Dublin here in Franklin County. And from a statewide policy perspective, in a role I sit in now, that's one of the great challenges, because it's easy to sit here and say, or to say all kids need to know this and aspire to do this, but then when you take that back to some communities, that aspiration and that understanding is not understood, not shared, and many times not appreciated. And so in a state where we have so much local control, and I think that's at the crux of a lot of this, we have local control and local boards of education who are elected and charged with determining what and where, what kids need to know and how, what opportunities they ought to have. And then we have an overarching system at the state level that says we should move in this direction or this direction. And neither are wrong and both are necessary, but there has to be a recognition in this process that every local community and every local district is different, and there has to be a way to for lack of a better term, infiltrate the local levels and help them understand that the world is changing. But in many of those communities, they aren't real fond of the world changing.
Well,
So I'm curious in what Keith is saying here, are you suggesting that we do need to let those communities know that the world is changing, and if their children are going to be successful, they have to have new tools and a new way of looking at things? Or do we just defer to them and say, you know, I know here in Southwest Ohio, you're perfectly happy with the way things are, leave it be? It sounds like you're suggesting something in between.
Well, yeah, I think it goes back to one of those Covey principles: seek first to understand and then to be understood. I think there are communities out there that are, and cultures that are vastly different. If you look at some rural communities, their values are such that they would not be real supportive of sending my kid off to a university so they don't come back to the community. They very much want their kids to stay in the community and live, you know, in the neighborhood. I'm just saying that the cultures are different, the values are different, and to paint with a broad stroke of the brush what we think every kid needs, that might fit for me in Franklin County, but it might not have fit for me as a Claremont County resident.
But it's fascinating, that comment, in the context of the Common Core academic standards in English language arts and mathematics, because what it is saying we are setting the same targets for the basics of what these kids need to know, whether you're in Oakwood or Claremont or Jackson County. And it's interesting because the superintendents have apparently bought into that, whether they're in Oakwood, Claremont, or Jackson County. I don't know specifically, but demographically we know that they've bought into it. So they've bought into the concept that there are high standards and rigorous standards that all kids in this state need to meet. Am I saying that fairly?
Well, I think that's fair.
And so why is there support out in the field? What surprised me, I was asked by reporters yesterday, what surprised you about this? And one thing that jumped out at me was the support for the Common Core, considering the appreciation of the implementation challenges that they face. I mean, they totally get that they face huge implementation challenges in terms of getting their teachers ready, technology, and all the rest, yet they still buy into it. So what's going on? And maybe, Steve, you want to jump in on that too. I mean, why have they bought into the Common Core?
Well, I think there's a number of things. I think first and foremost, the conversations I have with my colleagues, we support rigorous standards. We support raising the bar. We know, as we've already mentioned up here today, that the requirements of the workplace, and it's very different today. In Reynoldsburg, we kind of think about this as we want every kid to be able to have a great job. And so to meet the demands of a changing, evolving, highly technical economy, we know we need to raise those standards. We've implemented the core standards in all our STEM schools. We have 5 STEM schools, and their performance on the current tests are outstanding. And because you know our teachers get it. In the end, for us, this is about making sure that we have great teachers in the classroom for every kid. And our teachers worked hard to implement the core standards, and so I think that's what's at play for many superintendents. Raise the bar.
There's something also about Common Core that resonates with the educational thrust, educational theory for the past 20, 30 years. Experience-based, learn by doing, go deep rather than shallow, think and analyze rather than rote memorization. So I think the Common Core, I did a study of 2 studies of education professors, and that's all they were talking about for 10, 20 years. And it's penetrated also the minds of teachers. And if you do a survey of teachers, I'm sure you'll find support for Common Core standards. So there's, in this case, I think, across the hierarchy, educational hierarchy, there's attitudinal and ideological, if you want to use that word, support, value support for that.
Yeah, I think one of the other reasons that that folks are so accepting is when you look at the Common Core state standards, there's clarity, there's consistency, there's focus, and there's the opportunity for stability over time. maybe we can finally have a set of standards that's stable and will be allowed to evolve over time, as opposed to here it is this week and in 2 years we're going to do something different. And the fact that you've got 40-plus states signed on to do this, and you have that clarity and the potential for consistency, I think educators, they like that. Here's what's expected, and now we'll go to work on preparing our staff and preparing our students to be highly successful in meeting those standards.
So Peggy, are the voices of the educators getting to you and your colleagues on this issue?
Well, I think it's very important that we listen to educators, and I think that.
And I'm sorry, I was told, please speak into the microphone.
Okay.
I can't hear you back.
Can you hear me okay? All right. I think that one of the problems that we do have up in Columbus is listening and coming up with a good way to hear what they're saying, and the voices are all over the place on lots of issues. But certainly the message that the Common Core is something that is favored across the state is coming through, I think, fairly loud and clear, and I think it's one of the things that is helping us here in Ohio weather the storm of protest against the Common Core, that there does seem to be so much support coming from the education community on it.
So Steve, I want to ask you a question about blended learning. And it's fascinating how there is a lot of support for the notion of blended learning. Again, this is one of those reforms that hasn't been implemented in many places, but it is something that you've spent some time in your district working on. I mean, do you see it as a game changer based on the experiences you have with it, or is it just another tool in the box and we should be more skeptical than maybe we are?
Well, I'm always skeptical. It's just the nature of my makeup. But I do see blended learning as an opportunity to do things differently than we've been able to do before. What I've seen so far, and we've implemented blended learning in two of our middle school and one of our high school academies, our STEM high school academy, and we're going to roll it out in an elementary next school year. And when I go in and I talk to teachers about what is done, it's literally transformed their approach to the classroom. It allows them to use time in a very different way, the time that they have with kids, because it minimizes their need to spend time on rote activities. They can now spend their time truly teaching, and I think I've heard that phrase. If I haven't heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times from a couple of our teachers. And it's, by the way, it's a huge amount of hard work for them. Because it literally, I had a veteran teacher come to me and say, I've been doing this for about 20 years now, and I have never worked as hard in my life as I'm working right now, because it's our chance to customize the learning experience for every child. I firmly believe a goal of ours in Reynoldsburg is to have a quote-unquote IEP for every child, because I think that's our niche. That's the way we're going to really move kids along the continuum. So it's not just about digital content. It's just not about but it's more about how you structure the day to maximize your time with kids, spending time in small groups to intervene with kids who are struggling with a concept and allowing other kids to accelerate and move forward in a mastery-based environment that I think it's really been the revolutionary change in those particular buildings. And it's a different culture now as we talk about the individualization, if I can say that right, for every child.
Kirk, out in the field, I mean, is this something, there's certainly a lot of chatter around it and conceptual interest, but do you think we're going to see more districts moving in this direction and actually embracing it and flipping their classrooms and these sorts of things over the next few years? You willing to speculate on the future?
I think we better see more of it. I think the realization that the world in 2013 is different than the world in which I attended high school. And yet high schools look very much the same as they did when I attended high school about 6 or 8 years ago. But when I think about that, Terry, I think of my own kids and the way they grew up, and I've got a 30-year-old, I've got a 19-year-old, And the world my 19-year-old grew up in is vastly different than the one the 30-year-old grew up in. And if we don't change, in particular, our high schools, then they're gonna be afforded different paths. There will always be those kids that fit the traditional mold that can come sit for 7 periods a day. Then there are a whole lot of kids that they don't need 50 minutes to pick that up. They can do it online at home. They can catch that content in different ways. So I think we're very much going to need that. I think, though, that one of the things that we've missed along the way, we've talked about new models. Are parents ready for blended learning? Are communities ready for blended learning? I had a conversation once with a community group about this, and the senior citizens were up in arms, because if we turn the high school kids loose and they come and go, how will we keep track of them? And will it be safe to go to lunch if all the high school kids are on the street during the week? I mean, those are things for parents. Who is going to be responsible for my sophomore, junior, or senior student when they can come in and check in at the high school at 9 in the morning for a class and then leave and then come back at 1? Those are things that we not only have to get our school systems ready for, but we have to get our communities ready for and parents ready. Because parents very much are comfortable with dropping Jimmy and Sally off in the morning, knowing they're safe and cared for until the afternoon. So, and that's equally true with high school kids. I don't know what your experience was, but mine as a high school student was a lot of unsupervised idle time didn't lead me to many good things. So we've got to figure that out as a society.
Yeah, Peggy, the complexity of
Well,
this.
I was just going to comment, I think part of the problem is there's no set definition of what blended learning is, and there still remains all sorts of perceptions that it's swapping YouTube out for the overhead. But particularly what Steve has described is a very different model, and I don't think the legislators have yet really come to understand the potential of that model, or what role, if any, they should have in driving blended learning into the system.
I'm going to move to the 3rd grade reading guarantee, and I'll start with you, Peggy. And I'll really
It
admit
wasn't my idea.
Hey, Terry, excuse me.
Please jump in. Yeah,
Yeah,
Jim, go
I
ahead.
mean, this is all
and
in-
introduce yourself, Jim.
Jim Gilmore. I'm retired from the Dispatch. My interest is I have an interest in charter schools, and we are one of the charter schools that have a sponsor at Fordham. But just a couple observations and questions, and this is all very, very interesting. But I'm interested in, first of all, we talked about the venues in the state of Ohio, and we've got 614 districts, and do we need to deal with the governance of the school systems? And I'm in Central Ohio, and I don't mean the ongoing issues of governance in Central Ohio, but just as a general policy or philosophy, governance in school districts is awful important. I do understand there's cultural differences in these various communities, but how do we achieve some of the goals of equality in education without taking a look at the way governance is managed and what have you? In addition, I believe in individual learning, and the question is how does that interact with the Common Core? I mean, can those peacefully coexist? So a couple of questions like that, I'd be very, very interested in the panel's thoughts on. If you will.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to. Governance is a huge issue. It's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. The idea that really the future should be about the past, that every board needs to be elected, and that that's really the only type of school governance that's legit. I mean, are there alternatives we should be thinking about? Jim didn't say it, but in other states you have mayoral. Well, you have in Cleveland mayoral control. Mergers with a county board, these sorts of things. So who wants to tackle that? And I would also add, I'm sorry, does the state governance structure that we currently have in place, is it structured for the world that we're moving into? Or should we also be thinking about restructuring SEA and how it works? Anyone want to jump into this, or? And then we can go, and if you don't, we want to pass on that, we go to individualized learning. And
Thanks, Jim, for changing the subject.
we'll come back to the third grade reading guarantee.
Well,
Let me just say that I've had.
Don't hurt me.
I mean, governance. The speed at which things happen, I mean, when you think about education and the layers of governance that schools have to deal with, from federal laws and rules to state laws and rules to then what the locals, it's a very complicated system and a very difficult one for empowering people to make decisions.
let me approach it in a way that might provide us all a little cover. As long, in my opinion, as long as we are a state that funds schools the way they do, with so much dependence on local elections and locally approved taxes, then I think you've pretty much got a model that says we're going to leave control in the local district. I think if you really want to get at governance and you want to get at a different look at it, then you really have to get at a different funding model. I liken it unto this. I've got 3 kids. When they turned 16, I determined what they drove. And they said, how come I can't pick? And I said, when you can buy your car, you can pick. I'm buying the car, I'll pick. And so I think it's much that way. We have, local school districts with locally elected boards. Many of our school districts get less than half of their revenue from the state. So with that is local choice and local control. And I think if you want to move from local control, then you've got to move to a funding model that is in large measure provided by the state. That would be one way to approach it.
If you want to go there.
If you want to go there.
Peggy.
I'm kind of intrigued by your saying that, when you pay for it, you get to decide, because the state right now is, close to 50% of our budget goes to education here in the state. And yet, when the state tries to say what we should or shouldn't be doing in our schools, we get tremendous pushback. So, where
Well, but
Where does that role
I
fit in
think
there?
that's the complexity of it. It's not clearly one or the other, and so you pay half, I pay half. How do we decide? But I think that's
Sounds like a marriage.
that's part of it, and I think it's a part that would have to be addressed. And I did preface it with saying it gives us a little cover to talk about it.
it is a marriage, but a dysfunctional one.
Lots of marriages are.
I was just going to throw in a fact which actually surprised me looking at the survey results and the demographics of the superintendents. And I don't know if this is germane, but it was 34% said that they were leaders of districts that had 1,200 students or less. Another 34% had less than 2,500. So you have 68% of your state superintendents leading districts that had less than 2,400 students in them. It's very small, very rural, and spread out. So that complicates the governance question so much more.
And cost and everything else. Steve, you want to say anything on that, or you want to jump to the individual learning and Common Core?
Well, I'll be more than happy to jump.
Okay.
But it gives me a perfect segue, because I do believe I have one of my board members here this morning, Elaine Tornero, with Reynoldsburg City Schools. So I wholeheartedly support local control. But I do think, with all joking aside, I do think having communities vested in how they educate their children is just so important. And so I would never want to lose sight of that opportunity for a community to significantly affect the destination of their children. And it is a balance, there's no question about that. But so I guess that's where I go. But I'll leap to the earlier question about individualizing and core. I don't think there's a conflict at all. We're moving to a mastery-based system in our district. So we know right now, each day, where kids are in their learning continuum. And so for us, I don't see the conflict. What I would suggest that we need to take a look back to is are we capturing kids' passions? Are we tapping into their innate interest in what they aspire to do? I get a little concerned, and I'm guilty. When I'm a recovering high school principal, spent 11 years doing it, I advocated about 15 years ago to raise the graduation requirements for our high school kids to 4 years of math, 4 years for everything. And I thought it was all under the guise of raising expectations and setting the bar. And I've kind of retreated on that position in my many years now. And I'm starting to say that really does every kid have to take that 4th year of math, and what does that look like? Because we're so many of our kids that we're losing because they become disenfranchised with sitting in a class or online or whatever it is, and we're not tapping into their innate desires of what they aspire to be. And that's why I'm pretty excited about an initiative that we're trying to get off the ground in Central Ohio with Pathways for Prosperity, where we can start looking at the full integration of the college experience with employers, with internships, and getting kids out and about. I took over on January 1st of 2008 as superintendent, and I immediately declared war on the senior year because I said it's the longest social hour in the culture of our society. But it isn't necessary that all those kids have to sit in a class during that time period. And so we're really looking hard about how we integrate that employer relationship, internships, our relationship with our colleges. We have an early college academy at Reynoldsburg, and lots of dual enrollment options and so forth. But there's an application here that we need to tap into passion of kids, and as opposed to kind of a one-size-fits-all set of graduation requirements for all kids. That's just my thoughts on it.
Let's come back to the 3rd grade reading guarantee. Sorry, Peggy. I'll readily admit, we were out there championing this is the right thing, and there's a lot of evidence that kids who aren't at grade level by the 3rd grade in literacy, their futures are bleak. Point to a number of studies on that, but it obviously hasn't been well received out in the field, the folks who are expected to actually implement it. Or what are maybe some of the lessons? What should we think about this, Peggy?
Well,
Yeah. I'm sorry. Can we
You want to go ahead?
go ahead with this question and come back to you? Will that
Okay.
work okay?
That's fine.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I continue to believe the 3rd grade guarantee is the right policy. We just have far too many kids that are not learning to read, and the failure to teach our kids to read, for whatever the reason is, whether it's the curriculum we have in the school or the homes they're coming from, it doesn't really matter. But the failure of so many children to not learn how to read is just something that we can't accept. Could we have rolled it out better? Yes. Could we have been clearer as to some of the parameters of it? Yes. But I think the policy is right. I think we're starting to get there. It's been slow and kind of painful to get some of those policies in place and understood. I think the understanding of the policy has been the biggest challenge as anything. But I do think it's the right policy, and we are seeing changes in the structure of the primary experience. As Steve has pointed out, even though people don't like it, they seem to be finding things that they can do differently. And obviously, that's indicating that they're maybe finding a better way to do some things, at least to me. So, I think it's the right policy, but I agree the implementation's been bad, which kind of goes back to that governance issue. I'll just real quickly say, I think, the way we make policy on education in Ohio, particularly with the constantly changing policies and governance structure is not good, and I think that's something we all need to work on.
Either of you want to jump in on this? We'll take a question from the, you want to jump in?
Well, I would just note that in my career of 30-plus years, I think something like the 3rd grade reading guarantee has been on the radar every one of those years. I can't think of a single year where we weren't concerned and putting every effort we could into making sure kids learn to read in the primary grades. That said, I think that especially when we focus on the primary grades, and everyone wants to hear about resources and time and whatnot, I agree with all that stuff, but there's one place that we have not successfully went, and that is with the integration of other social services and other pulling other resources together to set the conditions for kids when they come to school, so they come to school better prepared to learn. When I could take my old school district and I could pick elementary A, and 95% of those kids came to school, ready, operating, say, at a 5-year-old level. I could go to another school in the district, and 95% of those kids came to school functioning at the level of a 3-year-old as far as preparation to learn. So if school is the common jumping off point for all kids at 5 years old, but if one's coming in functioning and having the experiences of a 3-year-old, another is 5, we need to do something in that preschool arena, and that will help significantly in that third grade guarantee. But what we're asking sometimes is 5 or 6 years growth in those first 3 years. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. I'm not saying we can't do that. But what I am saying is if we're going to do that effectively and we're going to do that consistently, that we have to focus on the first 5 years of life and providing supports to family and children so they come to school ready to learn.
I heard a real plug for preschool in there.
Steve, you want to?
Yeah, I would echo that, by the way. But, policy is at any level, whether it's the board level, state level, federal level, is really about establishing priorities. For us, is about establishing how we spend our money, how we allocate human capital, and a number of other things. And so for me, I've seen this. We haven't significantly altered the things we're doing in Reynoldsburg as a result of the third grade reading guarantee, short of sending out the required notice letter, but we've always informed parents of that. So hasn't been we don't see it as a burden on our school district. In fact, I believe that it's not contrary, and this is maybe where I come to be a contrarian. I don't see it as a quote-unquote unfunded mandate. I have an appropriated budget of $55 million a year, so I have $55 million that I need to make sure that kids can read. So it's about prioritizing for us and making sure that we were allocating sufficient resources, to Kirk's point, sufficient resources to make sure our kids are literate.
We could spend a day on this topic, please.
My name is Jerry Ballman. I'm a lawyer here in town and have a variety of interests in education. One of the things that strikes me is we seem to be talking about what is going on in Ohio and what's working and what's not working and so on. I wonder whether we've looked around at other jurisdictions, particularly other states, that might be kind of figureheads in terms of states that are moving more rapidly forward in developing new ways of educating kids. Or stated another way, are we drinking our own bathwater, which is an expression I never understood. But I wonder if there's too much focus on our state and what our needs are, and not looking out far enough to see what other states, other school districts are doing that might be a little farther ahead than we are.
That's a great question. Or I'd even add, are we taking too much from other states and thinking it's applicable here? I think there's an addition to that question.
Yeah, I think there's a balance somewhere in there for sure. Definitely at the legislative level, we look at other states all the time. We sometimes get criticized for that. We're not Florida, we're not Massachusetts, we're not Tennessee. We hear that frequently, but when we're developing policy, we certainly do look at those other states. The third grade reading guarantee is a classic example. It was stolen right from Florida. The Florida folks who have been highly successful with that program informed a lot of the decision-making that went into the third grade reading guarantee. But certainly there are states that are doing things very well, and there's probably 5 to 10 of them that we look to on a regular basis for some guidance on policy.
At the same time, I don't think we can discount the achievements of our state when you look at Ohio and compare us to the other states, many states look to us as a leader, especially as we work through these reform processes. And if you look at Education Week, which does one of the few studies, comparative studies, we rank somewhere in the top 10 or 12 states in the country. So we have lots of states that look at us as well. Not that, the other part, Senator Lehner mentioned the third grade guarantee from Florida. I think you see very much in our policy influence from other states. I don't think we're operating in a vacuum. In fact, sometimes I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for what we've done. That said, we aren't content to sit on our hands. While graduation rates and whatnot are higher than they've ever been, I'm a recovering high school principal as well, and when you set that goal for graduation rate, it's 100%, right? And that's not very realistic, but when teachers say that and say, well, that's not realistic, you don't understand. That's, well, whose kid's not going to graduate? Yours? Well, no, then the 100%'s the goal. I mean, I think we have to continue to push and expect more.
Columbus, I didn't know this until recently, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room do, but Columbus is known as Market Town, USA. And so it's interesting because in actually trying to share this survey beyond Ohio, we are a national group too, and trying to say why this is interesting, I actually used that little niche argument that what we learn, and Steve should jump in for sure.
I was just going to add a precautionary note because I run across this all the time. Reform fatigue. Just as I tell my daughter, she's 22 years, take it easy. And sometimes when too much goes on and it's trying to implement it, you lose sight. And also the teachers down the line, those frontline folks in the classroom, they really have this reform du jour mentality that they're doing it to us again. So there has to be a kind of pacing that helps the implementation and see if the results are getting there.
Please.
We talked about sharing things.
I'm sorry, can you introduce yourself too? Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Hello. My name is Renee Haggerty. I'm a college student from Ohio University here today because I'm hoping to be one among you in the future. Until then, though, looking at this kind of from as far out of it as you possibly can be, we talked about sharing things statewide, both from Ohio outward and the other way. Reform fatigue, huge issue. What are we doing to look at things that are already happening in Ohio? We're hearing great things out of Reynoldsburg. We have these blue ribbon schools, green ribbon schools. But I was just at the Connecting the Dots conference where we had a whole bunch of people from across the state, thousands, in the same room. We didn't know what the other district was doing. So I'm in my hometown, Elyria, doesn't know anything that's going on in Cleveland. Cleveland doesn't know what's going on in Elyria. There are good things happening. What are we doing to communicate within the state about what's going on?
Who wants to jump at that question?
Well, I know that the professional associations all have multiple conferences. I know our organization partners with Battelle for Kids, and we have a Connect for Success conference coming up in July where we'll spend 3 days sharing those things, not only from folks from other states what they're doing, but also the folks within Ohio. I think in large measure, though, we have to develop a culture where we're willing to reach out and when we see a promising practice or we see results that are really outstanding with a school district that's similar to ours, we have to take the initiative to pick up the telephone or to go make a visit and observe and share. But we've been in such a competitive environment for so long, sometimes we think it is a black mark on us if we look to someone else or ask the question. That somehow or another it makes me less effective as a superintendent because I called Scott Inskeep in the back and said, hey, I see Reading has a middle school of promise and I want to come see what you're doing. That somehow that makes me less as a leader because I'm going somewhere else for ideas and to learn. We just have to get over that. I think educators are always willing to share, but the other challenge there is when you've got when you've got classrooms full of kids every day and you've got buildings to run and how you balance the professional development and going and getting the ideas versus the daily responsibilities is always something that's been difficult for educators to come to grips with. And I think, especially as leaders, I think our job as superintendents should take us beyond our district boundaries so that we can learn and share with each other.
If I could just kind of weigh in a
Please.
little bit, and you mentioned Scott. Actually, I brought Scott up to Reynoldsburg to do a community forum to share his experience with open enrollment as we were contemplating, our board was contemplating an open enrollment policy. So I always appreciate Scott's willingness to come up and share. We've had probably in excess of 1,000 visitors in Reynoldsburg this past year from all around the country. And we were invited to participate with the Digital Promise League of Innovative Schools, and so we're now a member of that. So I think there's a number of ways that people can find out about what's going on. I sent I think I sent 9 principals and another probably 9 teachers using Race to the Top money across the country this year to look at other school districts who are doing pretty amazing things with who are spending less money and achieving at high levels, because that's our moniker in Reynoldsburg. And so they came back with all kinds of great ideas. So to Kirk's point, I think it's important for folks to understand to get beyond the walls of your own district, get beyond the walls to the other gentleman's comment, get beyond the walls of the state, and get out and see what's happening across the country. And frankly, and I know that I think Battelle earlier this year brought in some folks from across the pond to talk about what's going on. And so we're a global community in some sense, and so we should be able to vest in that kind of sharing with people.
I'd like to make a plug. I mean, Fordham does that too. We try to bring people here.
Yes.
I mean, and we try to do more and more of it for sure.
Can
Please.
I do real quick a
Yeah.
shameless plug?
Sure.
Since
I
Peggy's
just
sitting
did
here,
one.
I'm going
ahead.
to publicly lobby Peggy right now. But I also think we have a mechanism that was in the governor's budget. The Straight A Fund, to me, is an opportunity in this state to scale up and accelerate and amplify necessary school reforms, in my opinion. And there's a number of reasons why I feel that way. First of all, I think superintendents and teachers and principals across the state want to do something. And I think what the Straight A Fund has the potential to do, it's not so much about the money. Now I'm going to take that back if I apply and don't get money, but it's really not so much about the money, and I mean that in a serious way. It's also about the external validation that you get as a result of being a recipient that gives your Board of Education and members of your community a sense that, well, it's just not this harebrained superintendent that's going out and doing this. We're not, quote unquote, experimenting on our kids kind of mentality, that there's a recognition that this is the right work, and you get that validation. And I think that's just so critical for Ohio at this time. If you really want to bring about systemic reform, having an opportunity to have that in some way is going to, in my opinion, is going to increase and accelerate that opportunity.
So,
I totally agree with Steve on the Straight A Fund, and someone
So
made
about
the...
500 million then?
Yeah, well, yeah, see me tomorrow. But someone made the comment earlier that if there's a sure way to make the legislature sort of react and lead reform is if it doesn't happen within the schools themselves. And I do think the Straight A Fund is an opportunity to put that kind of leadership on the backs of the schools, to come up with things that do work and do make sense for you and that have buy-in.
So
You're here.
Can I do a follow-up?
Yeah,
here?
Jim, jump in.
It's obvious that I left the golf course to be here today, so I'm going to ask a few questions of interest. But in terms of reform, I would appreciate the panel's insights in terms of reform. I hear and read so much about, let the professional educators, the administrators, the teachers basically establish the reforms and weigh in. But if I look at, for example, at the survey here, and you see, third grade reading guarantee, which we've talked, has got about a 20% weigh-in. That means 80% of the superintendents are saying, I don't think it's going to help. You can take charter schools and vouchers and all the other things that are being proposed, and you see the superintendents don't believe that they will help at all. in terms of improving education. How do we reconcile, how do we get the politicians, the business communities, the folks together and wrestle these to the ground? I mean, I, for one, think third grade reading guarantee is an awful, awful important barometer on how a child's doing, and it gives us a way of gauging progress and deciding what strategies we need to go back and implement. I don't care what the cultures are or what the passions are. At the end of the day, everyone ought to be able to read. I don't think anyone will dispute that. So how do we get, third grade reading, we got a 20% weigh-in, 80% opposed to it. I say opposed to maybe the policy or the philosophy. How do we get to reconcile? How do we bring people together and allow the teachers and the professional educators to really have their voice heard to influence this type of stuff? Kind of more than a statement, but I'm interested in how the panel feels about that. Thank you.
Panelists?
Well,
You can go first.
I gotta go first. I do think there's some structural changes, frankly, that need to be called for. I've alluded to it earlier, but I think that the way we make policy around education in the state is very fragmented, very siloed, that it would be helpful if we could somehow break down those silos. Some states use a P16 council, which I happen to support. The idea that you would have a group of well-informed people with an education background that form a council to sort of advise and guide education policy that can endure over governors and over superintendents, appears appealing to me, so that you can get that kind of input in there. I think it's important to understand that most reforms that take place initiated from the legislature are not being dreamt up by legislators per se. They're coming from outside groups, people interested in certain reforms who have seen certain reforms work elsewhere. The legislators tend to take those and run with them. But that doesn't lead to that sort of very careful, thoughtful process that you have buy-in, which I think is important to make anything work. A family that doesn't work together is not going to achieve much together. And so I think we need to look at that. We need to figure out how we could do that better.
I don't think you'll find an educator who is in disagreement with the concept of the third grade guarantee. I don't think you'll find a single educator, teacher, principal, superintendent, board of education member that would argue that kids ought to be able to read at the third grade level. That's the question is, how do you do that? How do you measure that and whatnot? Now I'm going to say something that will aggravate my members that are in the room, but they've heard me say this before. I think it's true, and I think you got at a question I framed differently. I think as a profession, we've sat on our hands for a long time trying to keep things the same, and the world evolved and we didn't. So the question that I always ask our members to some degree is, how do we change that? How do we get back in front so that we're driving the agenda in an informed way? Because we do have knowledge, we do have experience and expertise that the General Assembly doesn't have. Unless they've sat in the seat and sat in the classes and had that preparation, they don't have. So I think you raise a great question. How do we all put our personal agendas aside? How do we put our egos aside? And how do we put kids first in this conversation and say, how can we best serve the boys and girls of Ohio? Mm-hmm. And that's a difficult question. And when you add that with political agendas, when you add that to community agendas and local control and governance issues, that gets pretty complicated. But we do, and I think we're making progress, and it's folks like Senator Lehner that provide us the opportunities to have that progress. Because I can tell you that our organization, the other school organizations, very much are in contact with Senator Lehner. She's a great listener. She She is not afraid to disagree and take a different position, but it's that kind of discourse that needs to be generalized that will help us do exactly that. But we do need to learn how to be one big family and accomplish more together.
But
Yeah,
families have arguments, you know, and families, I mean, and it's important to have arguments. That's how you evolve and change and grow.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that, just to piggyback on what's been said already, and that is that, you know, we need to invite folks to be in our tent. And we have two pretty good examples in Ohio already with what happened in Cleveland and what's happening in Columbus, where you have a community who's all in on changing the trajectory of learning for kids in their community. And I think that that's a place that we all could learn something from in terms of that as we think about, you know, the education of our youth, without sounding too melodramatic about it, is a pretty important thing. And it ought not to be left up to educators alone, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. It's just there's not enough resources available to do the thing. We have to pool the resources that are available in our communities, and we have to unite on behalf of children. We should be, as adults, we should be the shepherd of our kids. And I think that that's real. I always see that as a role of a superintendent in a community. I'm the chief advocate for children, and whether they go to Reynoldsburg City Schools or they don't. It's my advocacy to make sure that they are having their needs met.
So what we'll do is we'll take one more question, and then we're going to have Dr. Ross come up, and he's going to give some comments, and then we'll take more questions. I think I have that right. And you want these guys here, and if they want to chime in, they're welcome to. Great. So this will be the last question for this segment.
Understand. Good morning. My name is Steve Bennett. I'm actually in the minority here. I'm a parent amongst all you educators and appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I can tell you, 2 years ago, I had no idea what the Fordham Institute was. So I'm kind of new to this and very interested, and I wanted to bring kind of a parent's perspective.
That always makes me nervous because I don't know where you're going next.
So I'm interested in parent involvement and parent engagement. I was very disengaged several years ago and becoming more engaged. I guess I considered myself at that time kind of a low information voter or low information type parent in terms of with respect to you know, challenges and things like that are going on in districts. So a couple quick questions here. You know, how can superintendents best engage, you know, these low information parents to be more involved in the child's education to maximize those children's learning potential? As you know, there's a direct correlation with parent involvement in student performance. And also, kind of a secondary question, this is related to the new state report card. You know, that provides a lot more bandwidth in terms of information that's in there, in terms of how the districts are doing. And I guess I'm curious if you folks think that information will be able to provide parents, low information parents like myself and others, to be more engaged, you know, through that additional information in terms of articulating, you know, some of the challenges in the academic performance of those districts, to kind of draw those parents in to, you know, become more engaged in their, ultimately in their child's
Great.
education.
Thank you. So kind of rapid fire here. The report card and its ability to better engage parents, and what else are we doing to better engage parents, especially those who really need to be engaged the most?
I'm a failure. No matter how hard I tried to do that as a superintendent, no matter how many coffees, how many evening meetings, you tended to see the same group of engaged parents that would respond. When you were on the ballot asking for money, you'd see a few different characters, but those characters were typically the same folks that respond every time that you were on the ballot asking, you know, for money. And I think that's the $64,000 question. How do you get that low information? The people that really care about their kids every bit as much as anyone else, but they're not coming to the meeting, or and you can make some progress with social media and websites, but even with that, there are those people that you know, if the bus comes on time and the bus comes home on time and you had a good lunch and I didn't get a call saying you misbehaved in a passing grade, it's been a good year at school. And I don't know how you get to those people. I know you can make all the efforts to communicate, but we need to continue to try to figure out how you do that. And will the report card be the answer? You know, I don't know. It will provide more information, but my experience in a district that had 34 school buildings was people loved their school building no matter what the grade was for that building. Their kids had a good experience, they loved it. And if the grade for the building was low, they said, well, that was because some other kid, not mine, and they love the building. They tend to have less connection with the district. And so, you know, hopefully it will give, if it motivates some to be more involved, then it's worth the effort. But that's just a difficult, you know, what changed you? You know, what caused you to engage?
Honestly, it was, I saw a disconnect. You know, my kids were getting great grades. You know, the OAA OGTs were great. But actually, when they got to college, not so good. And then also digging in a little deeper, looking at my district in particular, starting to do the ACT plan and explore, looking at that. Assuming that those are, you know, the college path, college readiness trajectories. On average, less than, you know, about 50% of the kids are actually on that path. So there's a huge disconnect.
So to me, the question then becomes, how do we make the personal connection that is child-specific, because that seems to elicit the response from parents?
Well, yeah, let me jump in on that
Yep.
because I think that's one of the strategies to do it. And we certainly don't have all the answers around parental engagement either, but I require my principals to know the name of every child in their building and to know at least one family member's name. And now, that's a small little strategy that in the whole scope of things may or may not be making a difference, but I think it's hugely important for that human connection. I think in general, what parents want is they want to know that there's somebody in that school who gives a damn about their kid and is going to make sure their kid is okay. They're going to be safe and they're going to have their needs met and they're going to achieve. And I also think if we move to a system where every child can have an IEP, what do we do with IEPs? We have a group of adults who care about that child, including the parent, who sit around and look at the plan, design the plan customized to that child's needs, and ensures and then holds them accountable for meeting the goals of the IEP. Now, I don't know how much better you can get on parent engagement when you can have that kind of plan in place. And I really believe that technology, where it is today, will afford us that opportunity logistically to do those kinds of things.
I actually think this is one area where school choice has made a difference in that it really has resulted. I'll use Dayton as the best example. I mean, they understand they need to be better at engaging parents because if they're not, they can disappear. And so you're seeing it. Certainly, it's not 100% very well done, but there is at least new conversations and those sorts of things
Terry,
going on.
can I follow up on that
Yeah.
real quick? Because I think choice is hugely important. We've kind of advanced, I'm going to call it a pseudo-portfolio approach to our school district where we sponsor 5 charter school or community schools and then introduce choice within our school district as well. I posed a question, and we have, let's see, 3, 4, 5, we have 6 schools of choice at this point within our district. And I really believe that's played a huge role in parent satisfaction. They get a chance to go. Now, I posed this question the other day. Right now, we have inter-district open enrollment, and we're got about 300 applications now for open enrollment to come into our school. But we've always had intra-district open enrollment, but we didn't provide transportation. So if a child was assigned to one elementary school in terms of attendance area, want to go to another one, the parent had to get them to that other school. So I asked some of my principals the other day, I said, so what if we decide to go to a CODA-like approach to transportation in our district? And that is, any parent who wants to go to any school in our district can go, and we provide the transportation. And I had one person say, well, gosh, they would go to 2 or 3 of our schools in our district and leave the other ones, and there wouldn't be anybody going to those other 2 schools. And I said, well, then we'll close the other 2 schools. and we open up, I mean, think about that paradox.
Demand matters.
It does, it does. So I think choice is hugely important for parent efficacy as they think about the needs of their
We're
child.
going to invite Dr. Ross up now. Thank you, Dr. Ross, for being here. And thank you for being here for like, the whole thing.
The whole- Do we get to ask him questions now? Oh, yeah. Do we get to ask him questions? Because I've got about 15 years of pent-up questions I'm going to ask this guy, so.
I've got two. That's how.
Good morning. Good morning. It's good to be here, and it's really intriguing to hear the dialogue and the questions. I think it's really important. Before I go on, though, I need to introduce our State Board President, Debbie Turhar, who is here today. Debbie? And Terry, I have to tell you, when I read the report, you know, I'm going through this thing, and let's see, the new higher learning standards and assessments, teacher evaluation, third grade reading guarantee, A through F report cards, open enrollment, blended learning, school choice. And I read the results and I said, wow. Because anyone that knows me knows that I'm an advocate for each and every one of those. And so it's kind of a disconnect for me as I say, well, how can I be here where I am and advocating for these options? And I guess it goes back to a couple things, and I want to talk about why I am. But the primary reason I am an advocate for those is I think that we need to focus less on institutions and more on each boy and girl that we have in our classrooms. I think sometimes, and I'll talk later about some of the buts that I hear when I talk to superintendents, but if 27,000 third graders are not reading at third grade level last year, 27,000. We have 53% of our ESL students, English Second Language students, that are not graduating from high school. The graduation rate is 53%, excuse me. Afro-American students is 59% graduation rate. Students in poverty is 61%. The overall graduation rate is 80%. And then I look at the disconnects. I do know from talking to college presidents and universities that over 40% of our students are going into publicly funded universities in this state need remediation. 40%. I mean, it's just shocking to me. And yesterday, Sarah's back there, and you know, I'm always intrigued by these comments, but we were meeting with military folks, and they told me yesterday that 4 in 10 students are only 4 in 10 are academically eligible to get into the military of our high school graduates. I mean, that's shocking to me. If I'm an advocate for boys and girls in this state, that just shocked. And so as I look at these reforms and I look at these alternatives, I compare those results that I have, and then I look at our current rating system of schools, where we have 60% of our school districts that are excellent or excellent with distinction. Now, I'm not a very smart guy. I'm a country boy from Northwest Ohio, so, you know, but I see this disconnect. I see this disconnect, and it just doesn't make sense to me that that happens. So we needed to change. I believe we need to change. Are these all the right answers? I don't know. I don't know. I think they are. I advocated for them. I helped develop some of them. Still advocating for some of them. But I think it comes down to the fact that we have to own that discrepancy. And we have to start advocating for the youngsters instead of our institutions. And I think that comes back to leadership, and that's why I think Kirk Hamilton and Steve and this panel are so important. Because a lot of these things we're talking about aren't popular. They aren't popular, and obviously from the results here, Terry, they aren't popular, and unless they can be controlled by the superintendent, it seems to me. And that was the one component that struck me as I looked at this. And a lot of people say, when I talk to them, and I talk to literally hundreds and hundreds of superintendents around the state, and I always get the buts. I agree with higher expectations, but the new assessments are coming too soon. I know our kids need to read, but, and there's a million of them here, I mean, you can just go on down. They don't come prepared, there's not enough money. I had a superintendent in Northwest Ohio at a Basso regional meeting that said he wanted a waiver from the third grade reading guarantee because he only had 6 students that didn't pass. And I said, well, what if that had been your son or daughter? Really? But this is about leadership, and it means moving forward in best ways. I hear unfunded mandates, and you know, when I was in Reynoldsburg, and Steve probably groans about this, but a lot of times we were very proactive. We looked at the requirements that the legislature did and Department of Ed did, but we kind of did our own thing a lot of ways. I think they still do, and I'm proud of them for that. Because it's got to be about results. It's got to be making a difference for our boys and girls. And I do have to talk about third grade reading guarantee, and I want to relate that to some studies I've read about hopefulness on the part of students. And Terry, I will be brief. But to me, the single most important thing we have to undertake in our schools today is making sure all of our students can read by the third grade. I look at the data over and over again, and I know if a student can't read by third grade, what's going to happen. And, you know, does it cause conflicts with our principals and parents maybe as they go through that pre-K through third grade? Yes. Is it uncomfortable for some of our teaching staff? Yes. In some ways, I want it to be uncomfortable. I want it to be uncomfortable because you know what happens if they are passed on and they don't have those skills? When they turn 16 years old, one of two things happen. Either they get a work permit and drop out of school, or they just don't show up again. And that leads to incarceration, low paying, low quality jobs, if any jobs at all. It's an indictment of our system that 27,000 students cannot read at third grade level. And I agree with Superintendent Dakin that if that's the one thing we need to accomplish, we need to do that, regardless of the cost. I did have and they talk about the cost of that, and I understand that there's cost as we look at making it a priority, but it should be a priority. I asked a principal that was telling me that about unfunded mandates. I said, well, how much does it cost you to move the reading instruction from 90 minutes to 150 minutes a day? Is that additional expenditure, or is that just a reordering of your priorities about what's important in the school? And I think I know the answer to that. But we have to think differently, and that's about leadership. That's about people thinking reading's important, we have to get this done. The other thing I want to mention, because it's an article that I've come across that really hit me home, a couple of them. Irreplaceables about teachers, Melissa, but hopefulness. There's a surveys being done on hopefulness on the part of our students now, and it's done at 5th grade. And they survey students and ask them how hopeful they are about their future at 5th grade. And you know, the hopefulness level of a student by 5th grade is a higher correlation to success in college than ACT scores. Now, I happen to believe that being able to read probably increases a student's feeling of hopefulness. But I think we need to be aware not just of the skill level of being able to read, but the whole self-esteem as I'm important. I own these skills, I have these abilities, and I'm in control of my learning, and I can learn on my own. Resources, I know Kirk and I we talk about resources a lot. You know, I did a scattergram, I'm just an aside, and you know, about correlation between learning and increased learning and expenditures. You know what it looks like, the scattergram? A snowstorm. A snowstorm. No correlation between the two that I could discern. So I said, well, but I know districts are very successful in teaching reading and increasing learning. So it goes back to the whole idea of what is the leadership doing? Are we engaging our teachers in that leadership? Are we engaging our principals in that leadership? One of the things we did in Reynoldsburg is we set up processes for our teacher leaders that we could step out of the classroom and actually help other teachers and administrators learn and grow and for the benefit of our children. We have to get out of this mindset that there's organizational bureaucracy that's hierarchical. I mean, the best and brightest folks that know what's going on with our schools are some of our quality classroom teachers. The article, Irreplaceables, is just resonated with me again. I don't know if anybody's read that article. It's talking about teachers, and predominantly in urban centers, urban centers where teachers are leaving, quality teachers, high-performing teachers are leaving urban centers somewhat because of other things, but primarily because no one made a distinction between you're a superstar. No one told them you're a superstar. No one patted them on the back. A principal wouldn't go into the classroom and evaluate and say, you know, you're doing one heck of a job, and I want you to talk to some other folks here because you have something to share and you have a connection with boys and girls that other people don't have. So it strikes me as if that we need to be, in our leadership component, both the superintendent and administrative principal level, much more aware in identifying who those superstars are, who are those irreplaceables, and use them as resources to grow what we need to grow in schools. But the bottom line, and I will conclude though, the bottom line is that if we think about boys and girls, delaying these reforms doesn't work. I mean, 27,000 students aren't reading at third grade. How long are we going to go on? The third grade reading guarantee was not even was passed and not implemented for a decade. Really? How many children are out there in our high schools or dropouts now because we didn't take a proactive stand on we want all our children to read? How many? How many have we lost? And at what point do we say enough? It's enough. I'm personally at that point where we have to do this. We have to make sure and start right with the reading level and say we must make sure every one of our students read. Because I know if they can read by third grade level, the possibility of them feeling hopeful about themselves in the future and graduating from high school and being prepared for college is just hugely more correlated than it is right now. And ultimately, and Steve also mentioned the connection to jobs. I mean, careers and jobs. My son was a unique student at the high school, Steve.
I think I remember that.
Yes, I bet you do. Great young man, and but really school didn't make it for him. I mean, you didn't see the connection between what he was doing in school, and he was more interested in just getting dad and mom happy enough so he could play hockey. He wanted to play hockey. But now, he's a graduate of college, four-year college graduate, and he's out super successful, and I hope he keeps going because as a salesperson but that's the kind of thing. School didn't work for him, and we need to provide those portfolios of opportunities for our boys and girls. But the bottom line, regardless of this, from my setting, as I look at these results, I think it's incumbent on me to carry the message out to the superintendents and talk about it. And so that's my burden that I'm going to carry, and I'll keep talking to superintendents because we can't wait, we can't delay, we're losing students if we do. But I do appreciate the information because it really provides a charge and an opportunity that I have to face, Terry, and we'll be doing that and continuing to do that because I just earnestly and strongly believe it has to get done if we're going to do right by our boys and girls in this state. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I think we could probably take a couple questions if you like.
Questions from the audience, please. Where's that?
Steve, you can ask questions.
I'm going to ask the question then. As I have conversations, Dick, with employers and I mentioned the Pathways for Prosperity initiative that we're trying to get off the ground in Central Ohio, and it's directly related to the Central Ohio Compact, which is related to Columbus 2020. We talk about a system as kids matriculate through where we could start acknowledge them on a series of acquisitions of badges, credentials, and so forth, as opposed necessarily to the one-size-fits-all high school diploma per se. Any thoughts on that as a potential place where we could engage in some dialogue?
In my former job, in the governor's office, one of the things that I advocated for in career tech, and personally broader than that, was I think some of our credentialing we have in career tech institutions are, I'll be nice, shallow. How about shallow? Is that a good word? They need to be strengthened. And one of the things that was embedded in the executive budget was a component that would reward credentialing that would be tied to Department of Labor credentials, that would allow for a student that would finish that program at high school to walk out as a journeyman carpenter, plumber, electrician. Now, I don't know if, I'm sure all of you are up to date on what four-year college graduates earn when they get out of college now, if they can get a job. But I think we would have a different dialogue with moms and dads if they knew their sons and daughters could go through a career tech program in one of those trades, become a journeyman, and then walk out making $50,000 to $70,000 a year without any college debt. They might make different choices, and I think that's powerful. But it doesn't have to be just in, we're talking about result. We're talking about skills, the credentialing components, the Carnegie units, and not deferring to competency and skills and results, I think is a mistake. I think we need to focus on what students know and are able to do. We need to be able to credential those. Employers look at our high school diplomas or even our college diplomas and tell me, so, not really what I need. It's not really what I need. They don't have the skills and knowledge I need. And so I think we need to hugely make a better connection to the job world. I already heard it yesterday from the military. I know the colleges are feeling that. So yes, I think there needs to be a lot of different ways engaged. But Kirk, as you know, I talk to a lot of superintendents every week. They don't always agree with me. In fact, most of them don't.
That's true.
But I'm going to keep advocating because I earnestly believe that this is going to change. Not only is it going to take the moms and dads and the taxpayers, but the leadership has to be coming from our superintendents, our teachers, and our principals to say, we can't no longer be allowing this number of students not to be successful.
But that does raise an issue that probably is a point of confusion for educators. You know, we don't have a standard definition of education and what an appropriate education is. Is it the liberal arts preparation? Is it what some employers want? They want folks that can problem solve, that can work collaboratively, that can make decisions, that can read and write. Is it technical? Is it all those things? And you know, the bottom line is can it be just one thing?
It cannot be one thing. It's got to be a portfolio of options for boys and girls that they have an opportunity to select and engage with. There needs to be a minimum level of expectations and knowledge and skill, which even at this point is too low for all of our students. And so I think, yes, I mean, we need to diversify. That's why we need choice. We need options within our school, and we need to continue to develop those. I certainly would love to see more school superintendents initiate community schools. I know in Reynoldsburg, when I was there, we started 2. Steve's continued that tradition for that purpose. One size doesn't fit all. The mass customization of the skills and knowledge needs to be taken into consideration where that student is. The other thing I just want to mention, you know, when I hear about students coming in unprepared, I just say, we don't control all that. Now, when I was in Reynoldsburg, I think there was some opportunities that occasions, and I see Aaron Ross back there, where I actually had higher expectations in our staff and teachers had higher expectations for our boys and girls than perhaps some of our parents and community did. Part of my job as a leader is saying our youngsters can do this. They are able to do this. You're setting your expectations too low, and we need to do a better job together. So engaging the parents and raising those expectations are part of being a superintendent. That is part of being an educational leader in a community. And Terry, it's a pleasure to be here today. But the bottom line, we need to provide a quality education for every boy and girl in every school, in every community in this state, and that's my intent, and I'm going to drive to make sure that happens. Good to be here with you today. Thank you.
Give a round of applause.